Let's talk about offender statistics now. We'll begin with sex. It's male and female. Just to clarify. So we have seen a growth for incarcerated females. We're getting more and more women into the prison system than we have before. We'll get into this in more detail when we get into the chapter on women in corrections. Race, which we'll also expand on when we get into the minorities in corrections chapter. But another startling statistic to share with you. In 1997, 60% of the prison population was white. In 2010, what is that, 13 years? Only 34% of the prison population was white. Is this because minorities were committing more crime? No, it wasn't. We're going to learn about the cause of that in great detail when we get into the minorities in corrections unit. And it all goes back to the war on drugs. This is called racial disparity. Racial disparity is a condition that exists when minorities make up a greater percent of those incarcerated than in the U.S. population. So African Americans, for example, at the last census, I think made up about 14% of the U.S. population. But depending on whose statistics you look at, make up anywhere from 40 to 60% of our prison and jail population. That's called racial disparity. Age. Let's focus on the elderly for a minute here. And we'll talk about age again when we talk about special offenders. But we are seeing a huge rate of growth in elderly offenders. The rate of growth for the elderly is about 6 times the normal prison population. Fastest growing category of all. And no, it's not because old people are going out and committing crimes. In 2016, about 20% of all federal prisoners were 50 years of age or older. That's 1 in 5. Partly it's because the overall U.S. population is aging. Okay, you got that baby boomer group that's just been aging all along, and now they're pretty much 55, 60 and up. So the U.S. population is aging, and as it goes in the population, it also goes in the prison. And here's the big one, inmates are serving longer sentences. War on drug stuff. Right, they're getting hit with a lot longer sentences, and they're just growing old in prison. Question?
That's for federal prisoners, so what about state prisoners?
I do not have accurate statistics on the state of Michigan. I'm sorry, otherwise I would have put them up, but I looked.
Do you think it's more or less than federal?
I'm going to say it's probably at least the same. Yeah, I mean, just looking at the demographics, it's probably at least the same. By 2030, it is estimated that elderly offenders will comprise about 1/3 of the prison population at the state and federal level. In other words, 1 out of every 3. As I said, we'll get into this more in the special offenders unit, but this has some huge financial implications for our prison systems. Youthful offenders. We'll go the other extreme here for a minute. We have also seen a growth of incarcerated youthful offenders until just recently. And by this I mean people who are waived into the adult courts because of the seriousness of their crimes. So they might be 14, 15, 16 years old, but because of the seriousness of their offense, they're waived into the adult courts and processed as adult offenders. The number of juveniles entering adult prisons has recently dropped. The number of juveniles entering adult prisons has recently dropped. Check out this chart here. See the decline where I put the arrow? So prisons, jails in the middle, there's juveniles on the bottom, juvenile detention. Right there we see rise, 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 drop. And look at that, it's still going down. What do you suppose is going on there? I know, juveniles just all of a sudden decided to quit committing serious crimes, right? They're just nice kids now. No? What's that?
People grow up and mature.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about juveniles here.
They're just not getting caught, I guess.
All right, I got to vote for they're not getting caught here. That'd be a good guess, but actually not correct. What's going on?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't know because they didn't get caught.
Well, yeah, but how many adult offenders don't get caught, right? That's the dark figure of crime that we don't know about, at the bottom of the iceberg under the water. What's that?
That's funny. I said stricter.
Stricter parents? No, actually parenting has gotten worse. Parenting has gotten to be a little bit more permissive. What's going on?
They're always on their phone, so they don't ever do anything.
I like it.
That's a good point.
That's awesome. They're on their phone so they don't have time to do anything. I love it.
What about different programs that are offered, not necessarily imprisonment, but like a probation type deal, or I mean not for like a serious felony, of course, but
Well, that would also be a good guess. Special programs, things like that, that divert juvenile offenders, but not. Nope, that's not what I'm looking at. All right, put on your thinking caps for a minute and think about in your town something that they have been closing a lot of recently. Schools, very good. They have been closing a lot of schools recently. Why? Okay, and why don't they have the money to keep them open? There's not enough kids. We've had a precipitous drop in the birth rates. There are not enough kids to warrant keeping schools open for so few children, so they're consolidating and closing schools, which means that there aren't that many kids anymore. And because there aren't that many kids to get in trouble either. Right? It's just a demographic. It's the population. There are fewer juveniles, so there are fewer juveniles going into jails and prisons.
Seems like it kind of fits itself.
So declining birth rates. It's all about declining birth rates, really nothing else. So if you guys get out there and reproduce like rabbits, you know, then in 10, 15 years, then that rate will go back up, right? Here's another chart. Number of youth committed to juvenile facilities, not even into adult prisons. And see how that's dropping? Again, declining birth rates. Next up, category. Category of offenders. The greatest increase in any category has been for drug offenders. You knew that. Sentence length has increased. We're locking them up and throwing away the key. In fact, Michigan leads the group. Michigan gives out some of the longest sentences for drug offenders of all of the Great Lakes region states.
How much do you think that'll change with the passing of recreational marijuana?
I'm sorry?
I said, how much do you think that'll change with the passing of the recreational marijuana?
A lot, I hope. Yeah. So my most recent statistic is at the nationwide level, we're sitting on about 2.3 million prisoners, and over 500,000 over 500,000. I don't know how much over 500,000, but over 500,000 inmates are serving more than 20 years. And those are primarily for drug offenses.
Is this just period or like
Nationwide.
Would you say the better half or the better majority of that would be for repeat offenders?
I don't know, it's hard to say. You know, I mean, because we're giving such long sentences for drug offenders. So it could just be people that are just, 20 years or more.
Do you think that's unnecessary?
What's that?
Do you think that's unnecessary?
I do. Yeah, we'll get into all of this when we get into the war on drugs later on.